Welcome back to our ongoing all-day event on resilience and sustainability, resilient and sustainable infrastructure, lessons from global cities. My name is Dr. Serena Hoermann. I'm Associate Director for the Center for Urban and Environmental Solutions here at FAU. Welcome, thank you for being here. It is my distinct pleasure to open this panel on equity. So what do we as urban planners want to think about when we think about equity? And it is actually about processes. It is about including people in our planning decisions. This is the way toward equity. So I'm going to present just a little bit from my dissertation research, which was on climate gentrification and resilience. So we've heard a lot about resilience today. The point I want to make here is that thinking about resilience is both for shocks and stressors to the system, so things like hurricanes, but also long-term stressors like climate change. I think you have a good concept of what gentrification is. I'm very pleased to hear that it came up in several of the morning panels, but climate introduces an extra factor towards gentrification. So you know that gentrification happens when investments in a formerly underinvested area drive up property values that can lead to higher rents. And when you have this in a place like Florida and you think about things like exacerbated risk along the coast, you may have another factor that could be driving these property investments. So the research was based on a concept by Keenan, Hill, and Gumber, and they envisioned three different pathways. I think we might do this. Three different pathways for climate gentrification. The first is what I described earlier, in which some investments will go to areas of, and movement of people will go to areas of lower risk, in this case, flooding risk. The second pathway is where costs rise along the coast, and so people move out of these areas of where the cost of living has become higher because of climate impacts. And the third pathway is when we start building our resilience infrastructure, and that may increase property values, and so some people need to move away from these areas. The research was a critical discourse analysis. I won't explain the last details of what that means, but basically I'm looking for the concept of power, the concept of history, and the concept of ideology in how we form policy, how we perform urban planning in our communities. So the work was centered in Little Haiti, Miami, which the population of Little Haiti historically has been an immigrant population. People came to this country for the reasons that immigrants always do, which is for financial opportunity, but in this particular case, also because of political and economic unrest in their home country. But when they arrived to the United States, they faced a segregated city. As in many cities, Miami has a history of redlining. Probably you know what that is, but the brief explanation is that when we invented mortgages in this country, which is a huge innovation and a very important step, we also decided, however, which areas of each city were, in the minds of the planners of the time, the ones that were economically viable. And unfortunately, the areas that were the black and brown areas, these areas were shown in the map as red, and they were ineligible for any kind of mortgage or home improvement loans. What the boxes there represent at the top is the approximate location of the community of Little Haiti. In the middle there is the approximate location of Little Havana, and then the bottom box is the approximate location of the Central Business District as it originally was on this map, which is from 1935. What's notable here, and if you're from the area, you may very well know this, is that these black and brown communities were right on this coastal ridge, which is a higher area, a higher elevation. This was the area that was deemed at the time to be suitable for transportation. That's why we have our rail lines along this ridge, but also for these kind of unwanted local uses like prostitution and bars. They were normally located in these areas. So fast forward to today. We do want to preserve the places that we live in. Miami passed this $400 million infrastructure and housing bond. It is meant to address the risks of climate change, and also, as you very well know, there is a global, actually, housing crisis, certainly an affordable housing crisis in this country, but in South Florida and particularly Miami, these are some of the most extreme locations for cost burden and not enough homes. So in my investigation, I basically looked at 3 different sources of data. One was public record of city commission meetings anytime gentrification was mentioned. Sorry, can you go back? The second was that I held a focus group in Little Haiti, and the third was to go through the resilience policies and plans of Miami-Dade County and Miami City. This is just an overview of all the things that I looked at and some of the major milestones, both in resilience and in planning. So to dive in a little deeper, they had different recommendations for resilience strategies in Miami, the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County, and one of the most important was to build at higher elevations near transit. Now, this is obviously an idea that we've all been talking about in different ways. The problem can become when we come in with these larger developments into an existing community. So one of the zoning mechanisms that was used is called special area plan. It's known in the greater planning literature as plan unit development. So you may have heard that phrase. It's basically one is a subset of the other. And particularly in the Miami 21 zoning code, it allowed the aggregation of 9 or more acres of land to be master plan mixed use development. These are meant to be livable, walkable communities. So we're all loving these concepts. But here's the key. They don't need to go through the regular planning process. If you check all the boxes for these communities, you get administrative approval of your project. And the other caveat is that projects are meant to kind of not super disrupt the landscape, so they're meant to fit in height and scale with the surrounding community. So when you have something like Brickell Center, you know, a very big, tall building fits right in there. So that could be a very successful project. This was meant to be the highest building in Miami. They had it approved for 80 stories, but they are having some trouble getting a key, an anchor tenant. So the plan has changed over time, and now they're looking at 59 stories. But you get the idea. This is a very tall building in downtown where it belongs. But when you try to apply this concept in a community like Little Haiti, you can see how out of scale these projects could be for the community and how much the property values might be driven up in a very short amount of time. At the top, you see a proposed project. This was not approved, called Eastside Ridge. It was a $1 billion project. And you can just see, in my opinion, how out of scale it is with the surrounding community. At the bottom here is a project that was approved called the Magic City Innovation District. Again, similar scale, $1 billion project. So one of the rationales for placing the Magic City Innovation District where it is planned was because of this higher elevation. So they felt like they were checking the resilience box by putting in the development there, which is, again, a good thing, right? We want to develop areas that are of lower risk. But when we don't have room for public input, then sometimes people suffer, and this is where the equity component comes in. I just wanted to touch really quickly on these. There are several instances of SAPs in context and out of context. In other words, fitting into the community where they are proposed, and then some that seem to not fit in as well. So the Bal Harbour shops, if you're familiar, this is, you know, shops have been there since, I think it was the 50s, and they've been renovated over time. So here's a more recent picture. But they got an SAP to update, and that's a rendition of what the shops could look like under this approved SAP project. But then the Live Local Act, which is beyond the scope of my research, but it is very important for planners to be following the development there, because developers are starting to invoke this Live Local Act for their projects, and that's exactly what happened at the Bal Harbour shops. They started out with something that clearly fits into the landscape, but now they're proposing a building that's 27 stories tall in a place that historically they've been a limit of 5 stories. So don't get me wrong, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I love tall buildings. I have no problem with a beautiful skyline, and I love exciting architecture. But I also feel like projects need to fit where they belong, right? It's difficult. So going through all of these different data sources, there was actually quite a bit of overlap over what the institutions were saying on these topics and what the community was saying on these topics. But they were, of course, coming at it from a slightly different perspective. And so I have here some of the quotes from city meetings, from the focus group that I held. One is about the loss of culture, the feeling that they are going to be displaced again. This is something that the people of, that this person, this community member in Little Haiti expressed. Another thing is they're very concerned about housing affordability. And this is kind of already happened. The property values have risen so much, the rents have risen so quickly that the housing affordability, people cannot afford to live there anymore. A lot of the naturally occurring affordable housing is now gone. This slide refers to, again, this feeling of multiple times displaced. This gentleman leads a local housing advocacy group called SMASH. You can see, I know, it just keeps jumping, no worries. It's called SMASH, and you can see that his shirt says housing is a human right, and he was talking about the clash of values. And then I think this is the final one. We were sitting in this beautiful location in Little Haiti. It's an open-air restaurant. We were eating food that's inspired by the food culture of Haiti. And there were all these roosters strutting around, and they would just start crowing right in the middle of everything. It was a lovely experience. And someone pointed it out, and they talked about, several people actually talked about the rooster being a symbol for the culture, for the place that we were sitting, kind of an embodiment of the cultural assets that are yet in this place but may not be much longer. So I'd like to leave you with just a few ideas as planners. These are takeaways from my research. Building on higher ground near transit is a fantastic thing that we need to do. We, of course, want to get people who would like to get out of their cars to get out of their cars. For some people, it's not so much an option, but that's the only way they can afford to live here and get to their jobs. So the more transit options, the better. And of course, we want to have our housing near our transit, because you know that equation about housing plus transportation costs is actually your cost of living. The second one is about not displacing people. So a commissioner in one of these meetings said there's nowhere safer for them, meaning the people of Little Haiti, to be than where they are now on higher ground based on their low income status. So it is quite disturbing when we take people who are already in a kind of vulnerable situation. They may have a job, they may be a business owner, they're making it work. Not a great margin, you know, for error on their living expenses, but they're making it work. But then when we're pushing them out of their social context, we're just introducing more stress to their situation and to their lives. The third point about the adoption of the special area plans that bypasses community input. Actually, Miami has made progress on this point, and they have said, okay, let's just pause here. We can't simply approve these SAPs anywhere. We really need to look at this idea of context and see where it fits. Fantastic. Where it doesn't fit, let's try a different approach. I might say that we are facing this situation with the Live Local Act. Again, you're familiar with that, and I'm hoping that maybe my colleague Mandy will talk more about that. And then finally, the negotiation of a relatively low community benefits agreement. So by contrast, when the Bal Harbour developer negotiated their SAP, their community benefits package was something like 1%. So community benefits package is basically, we are going to put aside money to invest back into the community to sort of compensate for the loss that you're experiencing through this massive development that we're bringing. So that's an affluent area, and they negotiated one package. But the package that was negotiated on the behalf of the community of Little Haiti was like 1% of the building price. So again, there's a disparity there. So I think we're at the end. Well, okay, this is about power. I'll just let you read these quotes from the different commissioners. What happened here was, I mentioned the $400 million bond, Miami Forever. $100 million of that bond is earmarked for affordable housing. The city of Miami commissioned FIU, not FAU, FIU, to do this affordable housing master plan. And the recommendations that FIU came back with were, okay, this is an amazing opportunity that you have. Form a board to look at how this money should be dispersed, and then you can make decisions about how the money can be invested. So when they presented this plan to the commission said, oh, no. We are not going to give up control of this money to a third-party board. Now, mind you, the board was meant to still report back to the commission, but they said, no, we will be deciding how that money will be spent in each of our districts. And the result was that in some of the more affluent districts, and fair enough, they had single-family housing zoned in a lot of these districts. And so they didn't really have a choice about how they could spend the money the way some other districts did. But the bottom line is, few homes were built in the districts with that kind of zoning and with this kind of approach, whereas in some other districts, hundreds of units were built for a similar investment. So I think we're finally at the end. Yes, okay. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that we have time for questions at the end. I would like to invite my colleague, Mandy. Oh, there she is. I was looking for you back there. Let me just read a little bit about Mandy Bartle. She serves as Executive Director of South Florida Community Land Trust, and she is the principal and owner of Community Economic Development Solutions. Mandy is a visionary with the proven ability to shift community outcomes. Early in her career, she published more than 30 reports identifying strategies for distressed areas, resulting in over $60 million in revenue for and over $1 billion of investment within South Florida's underserved communities. So you can read the full bio. Mandy has done many, many, many beautiful things. The full bios are actually available on our website if you scan that QR code. I will turn it over to Mandy.
Good afternoon. Everyone awake after lunch? So I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here, share a little bit about the work at the South Florida Community Land Trust. And in particular today, I'm going to be sharing with you about the South Florida Housing Link. That was our equitable plan to build affordable, resilient communities near transit. And in particular, we focused on the FEC line, the corridor that connects Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. But first, if you'll go ahead, I want to share with you just a little bit about the South Florida Community Land Trust and the reason that we started almost 2 decades ago. So as city planners, architects, developers, leaders in the community, we often think about what makes our neighborhood special. And sometimes, we'll talk about buildings or a special place in the neighborhood. But to me, I believe that it's the people, right? Cities and communities and their character and the charm are really built by the people that live there. And if we believe that, then we have to actually start designing and building to make sure that people living and are working in our community can afford to stay. The other core belief we have at the Land Trust is that everything important starts at home. Where we live often dictates the access that we have to other opportunities. It's the number one indicator of our health. Where you live dictates where you go to school, which often leads to what kind of job you get, which again leads to what type of house you can afford. So it becomes this cyclical cycle. And if we believe that, and we know that people can no longer afford their home, we need to find ways and something to do about it. So we're working on fostering communities across South Florida where people can afford to live and have the opportunity to prosper. We do that by using the community land trust model. How many people here are familiar or have heard about a community land trust? All right, well, it sounds like I might need to do a follow-up at another time about what the community land trust model is. But basically, it's a nonprofit organization that uses a legal mechanism to separate the ownership of the land from the improvement. And we do that to protect the affordability of the homes, or in some instances, of the business. It can be done in rental housing, but more often it's done in home ownership. And the very first community land trust was actually formed in Albany, Georgia. If you want to see a video, there's an Arc of Justice that tells the whole background of that new community story, but it was really rooted in the civil rights movement. And people went out and they were knocking on the doors, and Charles Sherrod, who had marched with Dr. King, was getting people out to vote. And when those people that went out to vote came home, they came home to an eviction notice because their landlord didn't want them to have the right to vote. So they realized while they were empowered with the right to vote, that wasn't enough. It was actually owning their land that would help dictate their future. But if you think back to the 60s, we saw some images on redlining. That wasn't a reality for most. They couldn't go to the bank and get a loan. So they actually came together as a community and purchased the land and used it to both farm and live, right? So that idea of this community control of the land was really important. And most land trusts across the country, and it's now being recommended in a lot of communities across the United States, were formed either from this reason of community control, right? Wanting to kind of dictate what was happening in our neighborhoods, which is really important when you hear about things like special area plans and the Live Local Act, right? Which are preempting the right to have that public input process. This was a way for communities to be part of what was happening in their neighborhoods. It's also probably one of the strongest tools and mechanisms to prevent the displacement of communities that are gentrifying, because it's a permanent affordability of the homes. Cities are looking at it as a way to maximize and leverage their subsidies, because it doesn't just help the first buyer, it helps the subsequent buyers as well, because we make sure that the homes stay affordable forever. It is still a wealth building tool when you're doing it for home ownership, because there is an equity share, and these households do earn, not only do they pay less oftentimes to own their home than they do to rent, but they're actually saving money and building some equity in their home, which they would not have the opportunity to do otherwise. And of course, the most common reason is, again, to protect the affordability of our communities. So about 6 or 7 years ago, and I'll just call it BP, right, before the pandemic, we started looking at expanding our footprint. We wanted to be one of the first regional community land trusts. Often land trusts were very much at the local level, right, that community control and engagement. And so as we were looking to scale our development, we wanted to kind of increase our impact in the community, and we were looking at how do we do that? How do we be thoughtful about where we're investing, where we're working, and how we're doing the work we're doing? So we realized we needed to start driving our decisions with data. We looked at a lot of different data sources. We did a lot of studies, a lot of white papers. And then we realized we also wanted to make sure that we were providing access to opportunity. Again, if everything important starts at home, we wanted to be setting people up for success from the start. And then finally, we're a land trust, and we knew we needed land, right? So we wanted to think about different strategies and tools to accelerate the way that we would, as an organization, be able to acquire land. So the first thing we did when we were looking at studies and we were looking at data, we did what everyone else does. We went to the census, we started mapping things, and we realized that most of that type of data that's demographic based was telling us the same story over and over again. It was deficit based, right? You look at where the incomes lie, you look at poverty rates, you look at the areas that are most cost burdened, meaning people are paying too much for their rent or for their home, right? Those were all the same neighborhoods. And then when you looked at other things too, like where there are higher percentages of rents versus home ownership, where are most of the minorities living, again, almost the same exact map, right? So then we wanted to take it to the next step. And so we started looking at more of an opportunity-based model. And two things were really interesting about the map that we did that I think were a little unique from even others that were starting to do opportunity indexes. Is first, we included no demographics whatsoever. We did not think who lived in your neighborhood should dictate whether we were going to invest in that community or not. The second thing is we didn't come up with the data points. We actually asked the community. And so we asked our own residents, we asked some of our partners in the community. We said, what would build and improve the lives of our residents? And we heard a lot of different things. We heard, things that probably everyone in this room would say. We want to live in a safe neighborhood where there's good schools that our kids can walk to. We want to live in a community where there's grocery stores and healthy food options, right? But by far, the most common answer we got was they wanted to live close to transit. So we made sure to prioritize that as one of our biggest priorities. Go ahead. And what's really interesting about that is we took the same neighborhood we were looking to work in Deerfield Beach, and we compared it with the deficit-based maps and the actual opportunity maps, and one was telling us don't invest in this community. The incomes are about half that of everywhere else in the neighborhood. Homeownership rates are only at 30%. There's high poverty. People can't afford to live there. And so instead, then we flipped it and we said, okay, well, let's look at it from an opportunity base. And we realized it's close to job centers, right? Deerfield Beach is just across the water from Boca Raton. There's another job center that was built in Deerfield Beach. There was community centers, there was bus routes, and City Hall was just on the other side of the tracks. So we actually used that opportunity model to make an investment in that neighborhood. Go ahead. We're really, really proud of ourselves. We went back to the same kind of core community stakeholder group and we're like, look at our map. We came up with these beautiful models. Here's what it looks like in each neighborhood. And they said, well, have you thought about climate change? And we said, well, we're developers, so yeah, we're going to incorporate that into the design. We'll put impact windows and energy efficient appliances. And if there's not an AC in an older building, we'll add air conditions to think about heat. But then we took it to heart and we said, you know what, you're right? We didn't consider that in the mapping at all. So we overlaid one key factor, which was elevation. And when you started to look at that, this is not very different than what you see in Naples. Almost all of South Florida starts to go underwater with just a couple feet of sea level rise. And so when we're working with vulnerable populations, they have less resources to recover from a storm, right? So we want to put vulnerable populations in less vulnerable areas, right? Higher ground, a little further inland, so that they don't have to deal with the repercussions of climate change to the same extent. And so the other interesting thing now, when we overlaid all of these maps, and I know they're very small, so it's a little hard to see, but we started to see a trend. And you can kind of see it in the line in the middle, right? There was one corridor where we did see a lot of distress. There were some of those red lines where a lot of minorities lived. There was higher poverty rates. But that was also where all the transit lines ran through. And guess what? That was the higher ground. So we decided, okay, let's look at focusing on this particular transit corridor. Go ahead. But we were not alone, right? This is the FEC line, and actually this is part of our history down here. So I'll share a quick anecdote about how race, resilience, and the rail are all connected. So we heard earlier a little bit about Henry Flagler, the guy that built the rail. I'll share a quick story about one other titan in the history of South Florida, and that's Julia Tuttle. You guys might have heard of the Tuttle, Causeway, but really she's the founder of the city of Miami. And she's the only female to have founded a major US city. And you may have even heard of the story about her sending Henry Flagler during a freeze. She sent him a little orange blossom to let him know, hey, come to South Florida. It doesn't freeze down here. It's a great place to live. But the real reason that Henry Flagler came down was because she gave him over 100 acres of land, and that was enough to build a rail, right? Because she knew in order to create a successful city, she needed that transit to bring people down into the community. Now, rail was built, city was incorporated, but the part of the story that nobody talks about is that the last 100 signatures needed to be incorporated as a city actually came from the Black farmers already living there and the Black Bahamians that had built the railway. Now, it was built, they're a city, and we know at the time things were segregated. So if you're a white, you moved east towards the beach, and if you're a Black or a minority, you moved west. And that trend continues. You see a lot of the northwest corridors that were originally segregated and were colored town in Miami, which is now Overtown. Those continue to be segregated even today, right? The other thing that we realize is now that same corridor has a rail, that's this rapid rail that was connecting our major downtowns. So we were starting to see gentrification of these communities because they were close to the downtowns, also because there was new rail coming in and things were happening really fast. And of course, it was the higher ground. And so these are areas, again, less vulnerable to storms and flooding. So climate gentrification has already started to happen. And we wanted to make sure that as additional stations were being built along the Bright Line, and we heard from Dr. Rennie that there's going to be even more stations built along this corridor, that people didn't get left behind. We wanted to make sure that, again, there was a way to protect the affordability of those communities. Go ahead. So we had already thought a little bit about what would build resident opportunity and build that upward mobility. And the number one answer we got was by transit. So we were thinking about that. Go ahead. And then we also wanted to think about how do we create community opportunity. And we thought this was a unique opportunity to tackle several issues happening in our neighborhoods all at once, right? This was the dividing line along racial lines in many ways. So we could build back equity in those communities, investing in the communities that have been disinvested for a long time. We could look at improving affordability of both housing and transit by combining those two costs together. And then, of course, resiliency and targeting some of the higher ground. Go ahead. So now the last opportunity we had to find was the actual development opportunities. Where was the land? So we actually studied, this was before the stations were completed in 2018. We already knew that they were underway. They were under construction in the major downtowns, Miami, or Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm. But we weren't sure what other stations might be built. There had been studies done. So we took all the prospective stations. We didn't have a magic 8-ball. We didn't have a connection at Brightline to know what they were going to build and when. So we came up with our own criteria. We used some of Dr. Rennie's early work in looking at what makes transit-oriented development. And we found that the two key factors were really, does the neighborhood have the density to support mass transit and the walkability so that people will actually use the stations? The second main criteria that we looked at was, is there funding available? Are these communities that are redeveloping? Are these communities that might possibly gentrify? And so we looked at different zones. We overlaid opportunity zones, we overlaid community redevelopment areas, and we decided to prioritize those neighborhoods. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, and one more. And once we did that, we realized there was a lot of opportunity. We looked at all the vacant parcels within those that had all of that criteria in the first 1, 2, and 3 tiers. And we also looked at all of the older apartment buildings. And the reason is these older apartment buildings, it honestly makes up the majority of our housing stock here in South Florida, these low density, quadplex, duplex types of homes. They're all in need of renovation. They were all built more than 40 years ago. Most don't have air conditioners, right? That's my baseline, right? That's shocking to me. Most don't have air conditioners. And so one of two things that's happening right now. People are either coming in, making improvements, or tearing them down, and the rents are going up. or they're continuing to deteriorate and people are living in terrible conditions. We said we can actually solve both of those issues again. We can come in, we can make the improvements necessary, and we can keep the rents low. And so that was the reason we focused on that. The vacant land, we were targeting some larger vacant parcels that we thought we could do some larger scale, significant developments, and then even some smaller infill homeownership projects. Go ahead. So we started mapping again and we overlaid all of these things. We initially looked at about a half a mile between each proposed stations. We later expanded that to a full mile, right? Half mile is walkable, but guess what? It's really hard to afford a half mile near a station. So we went a little further out. We looked again at all those districts, the opportunity zones, the community redevelopment areas, because we thought one or two things would happen. We knew those were low-income areas that we should be investing in. We knew they were targeted for redevelopment, and we knew there was possible dollars or incentives to help us with our work. Then we started looking at where we could invest, mapping each individual vacant parcel, initially vacant parcels in older buildings, but then we also started overlaying publicly owned property, and we included property owned by churches and other nonprofits that we thought would be good partners. And then we didn't forget this time. We overlaid the elevation to make sure we were not investing in areas that would flood. And then finally, we looked at, okay, well, what's the land use in those neighborhoods? Which investments make sense to buy and renovate as is, or maybe make sense to buy and build new housing in? Go ahead. So again, the plan took all of these things in consideration. They took into consideration the climate, making sure that we were focusing on higher ground, walkability of these corridors so that people could actually take advantage of the transit lines. Although, admittingly, I did not know the prices that Brightline would charge. We thought it would be a great public transit route for our residents, but some of them have been priced out. We looked at the zoning. Again, if it's a higher density area, besides us being able to take advantage of it, we thought those might be areas that might be gentrifying, right? If land prices are low, but the density potential is high, those might be redeveloped really soon. We looked at districts, and then we came up with a key core strategy. We wanted to make sure that the affordability was protected through the community land trust and that community ownership remained in place. Another unique thing was we realized it was great to have a plan, but still we needed the land. And if we needed land, we needed resources to buy the land. So we created a partnership with CDFIs. Has anyone heard of CDFIs? They're community development financial institutions. Basically, they're community banks, right? They're lenders. They were created with the intent to offer better products that would incentivize community development work. So we created, we've actually brought together 5 partners, all kind of that came together with a powerful purpose to build these affordable, resilient communities near transit. And then we jointly applied for funding. We were the recipient of JP Morgan Chase's Pro Neighborhoods Award, which was their largest national award. It was $5 million. That came through our partners at the CDFIs, who lent them to us at very favorable terms so that we could start buying the land and the buildings needed. And by favorable terms, we really wanted to use it as a grant, but it couldn't be a grant. We're working with lenders, right? They didn't want to give us free money. So we came up with a compromise, and we came up with what we called dequity. It was debt. It is debt. It's a loan. I've got a loan on my books, but it's going to be forgiven. And because it's going to be forgiven, I'm plugging it into my pro formas as if it's equity, as if it's my own cash and equity, because I don't have to pay it back. I'm just paying interest, so I'm calculating the interest payments, but because I don't have to pay that principal back, I'm able to invest it in a way as if it's my own equity in the deal. Go ahead. And again, because of that, we were able to achieve a lot of our goals, right? We're building new, we're renovating existing, we're using sustainable building practices in everything we do, and most importantly, in all of our projects, we're putting them in the community land trust to protect the long-term affordability of those homes. Go ahead. And you can see this $5 million actually is allowing for tremendous growth of the organization. To date, we have over 100 units and 100 homes leased. Most of them are rental, some of them are home ownership. That, believe it or not, actually puts us in the top 10% of land trusts across the country as far as volume. Most, actually all of our units are leased to low and moderate income households. Most are minorities. And we've invested, sorry, go back. I wasn't done. I was nodding, but I wasn't done. And we've invested over $30 million of public and philanthropic money in order to achieve those goals. But where we're going, right? That $5 million, we're actually planning to leverage it into $200 million over time. It's not going to be overnight. It's going to take us some time to find that other capital, right, in order to actually build vertical on those projects. But we were able to do what we intended, right? We're a land trust, we need land. So we started acquiring land. We've got over 51 homes that we're planning to either renovate or build new starting this year, hopefully this summer. And then we have a whole bunch of homes in the pipeline, over 500 units in the pipeline. Those are the ones that we are still working on kind of assembling the capital stack. A lot of them will be larger scale projects that will be tax credit developments. We are in the phase of applying for those funds, but that's where a lot of the $200 million leverage will come from. So to share with you the first project, when we did our first opportunity map, this is the neighborhood in Deerfield Beach that we invested in. Because again, we were looking at what are the community assets. I love this picture, and it's intentionally in black and white to show the stark difference between what we built in the background and what's there, right? It was vacant land. This neighborhood, there had not been a single home built in this community for over 30 years. This was a community just west of the tracks, right? Largely settled by Black Bahamians, and a community disinvested and left behind. There was no infrastructure underground for sewer and pipes, and really no investment, no change happening in the neighborhood. But I have to say, we built 6 homes. After we built those homes, I get calls from our residents every couple months that another home's being built. So there's been over 10 new homes built in that neighborhood since we built, right? And that's part of community development. We take first these nonprofits or local government takes the risks in these neighborhoods that nobody else is investing in. We make an investment, and that sparks other investment in the community. Go ahead. Very proud of these homes. They received multiple awards from the American Institute of Architects. They also received 2 green building certifications. They were the first in South Florida to achieve the Energy Star Green certification and the Enterprise Green certification, which were actually pretty difficult to achieve because you have to go above and beyond our building codes to a certain level to achieve those statuses. So these have the top of the line air conditioning systems that you would probably see in main office buildings. But we thought it was very important to make those additional investments. 1, because it would lower the cost for our residents. And 2, we were very particular in the materials we chose. So you see what looks like wood on the front facade. We were very worried about that over time falling apart, and our residents who are on fixed, some of them are on fixed incomes, other were low income households, might not be able to afford the maintenance. So we went ahead and did marine grade wood, and we did all of these things again to reduce the costs that our households would have on these homes. They were sold for under $200,000. This was at a time that I would say the median sales, this was in 2020, the last ones were sold. So it was probably the median sales price was maybe $350,000. I would imagine if these homes sold today, it would probably be $600,000. They were 3 and 4 bedroom homes, new construction. But because we use the community land trust model, the resale of these homes is going to be capped. There's going to be an equity share, right? So the first households got in, they bought it at below market price, and they're going to pay that opportunity forward to another income qualified buyer so that they can afford the home as well. Go ahead. It did take a whole lot of subsidies and a whole lot of sources to come together. The county, the city, the other city, the bank, and several lenders all came together in order to help subsidize this project. Go ahead. And of course, this is what we want to see at the end of the day. Great story about this young gentleman had just graduated. It was his father's dream for him to graduate college and own his home, and he did that all in the same year. In the 3 years since he's lived there, he's now married. His son just celebrated his second birthday. So those are the reasons we do what we do. Another project that we are getting ready to start construction on this summer is located in the target community of Little Haiti, right? This is a neighborhood that we know is being actively, is being gentrified. The homeownership rates, I think, are under 10% in this neighborhood. So we're going to be locating homes in a community that's gentrifying and providing homeownership in a community that really has none. Go ahead. These were designed by a local architect who had recently visited Jacmel. And so that was kind of the influence for some of the balcony designs. That is actually a Haitian Creole influence, not a New Orleans influence. But they were to combine both the Haitian and Miami Mimo architecture in the design. Go ahead. And they are going to be 1, 2, and 3 bedroom villas. The design was actually largely dictated by the neighborhood residents when we bought the property from another local community organization, the Haitian American CDC. We asked their pool of buyers what they wanted to see. Do they want rental? Do they want home ownership? Do they want a condominium? Do they want townhouses? And so we use that to help inform the design, including even the way we design the kitchens, because we had heard that that was, for them, one of the most important parts of their culture and their community, but they wanted to make sure that it was, kind of open space as well that they could use. We heard intergenerational living was important, so a couple of the units do have ground floor, where if they have a grandmother, they can't make it up the stairs, could live, and then the rest is upstairs. Go ahead. And then finally, our biggest and most ambitious project was purchased with those funds from the Housing Link. We bought a site that was, just over town, right? Over downtown Miami. That's where the name came from, in Overtown. You can see here what has happened to that community. First, it was divided by the rail, and then it was cut in half by the highway construction twice. And I circled that little block. That's the block that we purchased. We own half the block. The YWCA owns the other half of the block. But you can see that looks like a block that you would want to live on, right? Very vibrant, nice neighborhood. You can see an entire block was destroyed during the highway construction. And because of that, for the last 30 plus years, our half of the block has remained vacant. Right? So the highway destruction completely took away what was once an established community. So our goal is to reconnect that neighborhood. Again, when I say this is our biggest, boldest, most ambitious project yet, it is. We can build 700 units there. If we decide to use the Live Local legislation, we can build unlimited number of units, and then it will really be our budget that dictates how many homes we build. We're expecting that the first phase will have at least 180 units, and the second phase will as well. But again, if we get enough subsidy, we can go much higher than that. But our goal in the design is, again, to try and reconnect the community that's been divided by the highway and look at thoughtful ways so that we can bring people in from the neighborhood and not kind of wall off the community like it was done with the highway construction. So got it. So I'm looking forward to questions later. I would be remiss at a university to not mention my contact information is here, both in case you have questions, but also because we are hiring. I'm currently looking for an executive assistant that would work very closely with me to keep the organization functioning and organized. This summer, I'm looking to hire 2 paid research interns, one to expand on the work that we did on the Housing Link, on the mapping, to update those maps, and 2, to explore other financing strategies that we could use to attract more equity into our projects, including creating a CDFI of our own, possibly, or creating some type of fund where we might be able to use that to invest in our deals going forward. So contact information is there. Thank you. You want to sit? Yeah.
We just have a couple of minutes. Well, actually, it's kind of, we're at 1 o'clock, aren't we? Okay, so maybe just a really couple brief questions if anyone has. Do you have a question for Amy? Question was on air pollution in that project.
So when I say we're at the early stages, we are at the early stages. We have not designed. We're currently working with the city to think about site planning. But I would imagine, to me, we did prioritize in our Deerfield homes air quality when we looked at our green certification. I would think this would be a prime project to also prioritize air quality as well. Yeah, so we had a stakeholder group, and then we also did some interview of our residents. They didn't give us the data itself, they gave us the data points we should consider, right? So they gave us the priorities. And then we did engage a researcher who was formerly at FAU. I think she both got her master's here, and I believe she taught here at one point, Dr. Rebecca Walter. She dove in and found other data points outside of the census to look at safety, food deserts, and a couple other things for us. So how are we looking at making sure the entire neighborhood stays affordable? So we can really only control what we own, right? And that's why we've made a big push to try and do land acquisition and acquisition of existing buildings. I will say, I'm not sure if this was part of the question, but again, if they are home ownership projects, our resale price is capped in order to make sure that it stays affordable for the next buyer. So in that example, the Deerfield homes that were sold for $200,000, those buyers cannot sell it for $600,000 today. They're able to get 10% of the market appreciation, and then everything they've paid down in their principal and put down, and plus all the monthly savings that they had, that's their equity. We don't take the other equity. It is called an equity sharing. We don't cash out either. It's just a reduced sales price to keep it affordable for future buyers.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we probably need to thank you for your time, and we're going to welcome up the next panel. So let me call those folks forward. We have Dr. Fred Bletcher, who will be leading that panel for us. We have Mr. Peter Henn, who will be joining us on that panel. And we have Ms. Nancy Gassman, who's an expert from the city of Fort Lauderdale. So if I can get all of you to come up and pass that over to you.